Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. We are here in London, so good afternoon. A quick preview of our webinar topic today, the psychology of change, the impact of us versus them on your ROI. Now, we've had loads of interest. It's proving to be quite a hot topic, judging by the sheer volume of pre-registration and registrations that we've received. So we are super thrilled and very excited to spend the next 45 minutes with you. My name is Susie Mann. I'm an organizational change and training consultant in the Workday practice here at Cognizant. And with me is our esteemed presenter and the star of the show today, Ellie Jones. Now, Ellie holds a master's in organizational and occupational psychology and has a particular interest in understanding human behavior within and outside group dynamics. Now, today she's going to be sharing her knowledge and best practice with all of us through an insightful conversation about the us versus them effect and how it actually applies to your team and the success of your Workday deployment. Now, although we won't be hosting a live Q&A, we do encourage you to post questions in the chat and we'll certainly address those directly. This session is also being recorded and we will be sharing a link with you together with the slides within the next week. So without further ado, let me now hand you over to Ellie.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Susie. So thank you everyone for joining. Before we get into the session today, we did want to launch a poll at the start, just to get some insight from you guys. So basically, I'm just going to walk you through what we'd like to do. So what we want you to do is imagine there are two different webinar sessions that are going on today. So we have the first session, which is this one, the one that you're in now. So this is us versus them. And then imagine there's another us versus them session going on later today. So we would like you to assign some scoring points to this session and to the session later. So there is no criteria for assigning these points. We just want you to pick one of the options that you think you would like to assign. So, for example, if you were to choose the second option, you'd be assigning 9 points to the session, and then you'd be assigning 5 points to the later session. So hopefully that makes sense. And what I'll do is I will start walking through the agenda for today while you guys can start answering the question. So, what have we got on today? So we're going to start off by going completely back to basics. So we are going to start by looking at what actually groups are and what the us versus them principle is, because I can understand that not everyone might know what it is. So then we're going to start having a look at what the us versus them principle is in the workplace, and particularly in client relationships. And then we're going to look at how we start to combat us versus them, both theoretically and in real life, making some practical takeaways. And then we're going to close out the session for today. So going back to the poll, thank you guys for taking part. What it was a really small scale experiment it was based on Henry Tarsfield's minimal groups experiment. So if you don't know what that is, he basically split his participants into two different groups and assigned them to different artists that represented the group. And then he asked them, like I asked you guys, to assign points to this group and to the other group. So as you can see from the results, most of you picked 13 and 13. Some of you did fall for my trap though, which I'm very happy about. So if you picked the first three options, you're more likely to be showing an us versus them. So why is that the case? So you wanted to give potentially your team, so this session, the session that we're in now, a larger lead that put you in front of the other team. So by picking 7 and 1, you are essentially putting your team in front and creating the biggest difference that you can. So the fun part about his experiment and this little experiment is that there was absolutely no reason for assigning these points. You know, there was nothing to win. There was no reason for it. It was simply just assign some points. So realistically, most people should have chosen 13 and 13. So some of you are clocked on and you have picked 13 and 13, but some of you did fall for it. So I'm glad. But obviously, we're going to talk about us versus them in the session today. So hopefully in the future, if we were to run the session again, you'd be picking 13 and 13 because you'd know all about us versus them. So let's have a look at the basics. Let's start with, what are groups? So it's a seemingly simple question, but sometimes we have to get simple questions out of the way before we look into the more complicated things. So by definition, groups are a number of people or things that are located, gathered, or classed together. So people derive their sense of self not only from their personal identity, the unique characteristics, but also from their association and identification with one or more social groups. So can't get my words out. Let's take a look at some examples. So for me, I am female, so I belong into that group. I also have brunette hair, so I belong into that group. But groups can be quite fluid, as you probably saw from my picture at the start. And if you saw any of the adverts for this session, I have blonde hair in my profile picture. So, I think groups can change. I've transitioned from one group to another. But these groups are based on my physical characteristics. But groups don't have to be they don't have to be with physical characteristics. They could be more social as well. So whether we consciously acknowledge it or not, groups are all around us. So maybe start having a think to yourself what groups you might belong to. So I'm just going to divulge into a bit of information about what groups mean in terms of social aspects. So again, by definition, groups are two or more people that share similar characteristics and have a collective sense of unity. So again, if I look at myself, I go spinning quite regularly. So I would categorize myself as someone that likes spinning, and I have things in common with other people that like spinning. Why I like spinning? Not sure, because it's horrible and I hate it, but I love it at the same time. So at the gym that I go to, I understand that there are certain unwritten rules that create this sense of collective unity. We all understand what it means to be a part of this group. So an example of some of the unwritten rules that we have, no phones when the session is running. It's a judgment-free zone. Wipe down the equipment after you've used it. And this is what happens at my gym, but it could be different at another gym, or it could be the same. But that's, when we think about it, is why we start having this sense of unity where we all feel like we belong. So then, why do we start favoring our own group compared to others? So this sense of unity, we derive our sense of self from being a part of that group. And what that essentially means is that you resonate who you are as a person with the group, and it actually resonates with your personality. So then that's when we start to favor our own group. So again, let's take some examples to put it in real life. So we talked about that there are many groups in the world, but there are also groups within groups. So let's take football, for example. So I'm going to be thinking about football in the UK. So football is where you play with your feet, not your hands. So you can also think about the same with American football, basketball, any team you like. But we have one large group of people that like football, and they all should realistically get along because they have something in common, that they like football. But if we take another individual, or somebody, let's say that likes rugby, somebody that likes football, somebody that likes rugby, they might not get on as much because they don't have those shared characteristics and those similar things in common. So the point is that we tend to usually get along more with people who are in the same group as us because we have that sense of unity. But then going back to our football example, within football, we have different teams. So you might be a Chelsea supporter, you might be a Manchester City supporter, a West Ham supporter, Tottenham, Arsenal. You could have any team. And the thing with that is those teams themselves then might not see eye to eye, because even though they are part of the big group that likes football, they are also then part of different groups. So these different groups then start to hold different values, different beliefs, different rules. And again, all of these things are not exactly written out rules. They are things that are unconscious that we kind of abide by. So again, I don't think any of the football chants are written down anywhere. I'm not an avid football fan, so I'm not sure. But most people, as you start to belong to a certain group, you start knowing these chants, and they're going to be different from team to team. you're not all going to have the same one. So we then start to think of why do we start then favoring our own group, and what's the reasoning behind it? So we have two main potential theories as to why this is. So uncertainty reduction and positive self-concept. So essentially, for uncertainty reduction, the world is a big and scary place. There are so many decisions to make. There are so many things to interact with, and it's quite hard to navigate. So when we feel uncertain, it makes it difficult. So being and belonging to a well-defined group, they provide that high degree of structure and clarity, making it more meaningful to navigate, so we can get along in our day-to-day a lot easier. So like I was saying earlier, groups tend to have these sets of rules that people follow. And again, they're not these written down rules. They're not set in stone, but they do make it easier to go through life. And most members of the group are aware of these rules. And that's part of the reason why they identify with the group and why they like the group. So moving on to the second sort of reason is positive self-concept. So again, the world is a big, scary place, and humans are social beings. We like being a part of something else. We don't like necessarily being on our own. Sometimes a bit of alone time is good, but not all the time. So when we are part of a group, we feel like we belong. And, that intergroup differentiation is thought to embed positive distinctiveness, and it helps establish a positive social identity, and therefore it helps raise our self-esteem. So essentially, we just feel good being a part of a group. So when we start favoring our own, what then happens? So this is when us versus them, the us versus them principle starts to appear, and we start noticing the differences between groups rather than the similarities. So what actually is the us versus them principle? So essentially where we view our group, the one that we belong to, the us, as positive, and we start viewing the other group, the them, as negative. And the other group may not be inherently a negative group, but we view them as negative because they don't belong to our group. So maybe while we're going through the slides, think about where you might have actually seen us versus them occurring in real life, because sometimes we don't realize it straight away, but when we think about it, you can start to see where it might be happening. So most of you joined the session today to have a look at us versus them in the workplace, in organizations. But what we wanted to focus on today is us versus them in client relationships. A lot of research tends to look at interdepartmental us versus them. So, between leaders versus employees, between sales and lettings, or HR versus finance. But what we want to look at is in client relationships, because sometimes this is overlooked, and it is actually incredibly important, and it can be equally as problematic. So what type of relationships can we actually have? So we have a client team. So I'm going to talk about this in my version. So the client team is the external team to me, and then we have the Cognizant team. So that's my internal team. But then we also have a secondary external team, which is the client employee. So these are just 3 examples. There could be so many more teams than this, but these are just some key ones that we can start to divulge and have a look into. So with these relationships, us versus them can start appearing between all 3 of these. So let's have a look at the most obvious one. So the client team and client employees. This is that internal conflict that might start happening. The client team are changing things, and the employees might not get a say as much. They have that us versus them. But then we also have, say, the client team and the Cognizant team. So for me, it's internal versus external. So we're coming in as Workday experts, whereas the clients are coming in as their organization's experts, and we're expected to work together to join forces, even though we might have 2 completely different cultures and different working styles, and we could just be completely different, and we're expected to get along, work together as one team, but sometimes that's not always the case. And then the last example is potentially the Cognizant team and the client employees. So we think of it as, employees might see the Cognizant team as a completely external factor coming in and changing their day-to-day life, and which most people don't want. People don't like change. So having a completely external team where they don't know who they are can then start to create this us versus them, because obviously we start seeing the differences between the two groups rather than the similarities. So we've talked about us versus them, and we've talked about how these groups actually form, but what actually happens with us versus them? Why is it so negative? So when we have two groups that are well defined, they can cause conflict, which can prevent our goals from working, and prevents the cohesion between the groups, and therefore it impacts our return on investment. So often what we find happening with us versus them is decisions are made with subconscious discrimination. So this means that we're not necessarily actively looking to discriminate against another group, but it could start happening without you being aware. So some examples of this. So you could be more forgiving of your team for a missed deadline than an external team. And you could be holding that external team to a higher standard. And it may seem small, but over time these things build and it creates that divide between the two groups. So frequent occurrences of this subconscious discrimination can lead to some pretty negative effects. So we could have burnout, stress, mistrust, stagnation of the overall project, less innovation. Why would you be sharing your ideas if they constantly got shut down? So all of these negative effects affect the cohesion between the teams, and therefore it affects the overall project productivity. So if we have a team that's not working together, then the project has not only got to run the actual product itself, but they then also have to jump over the hurdles to be able to actually work together, which is then affecting our ROI. So how do we actually combat it? So what we're going to do is have a look at some theory first. So the reason why we're looking at the theory is because there's no hard and fast rule about how we combat us versus them. Like I said before, people are complex. We have so many different feelings, emotions, decisions to make. We can't always say that this is the answer. There is no set answer. So if we look at the theory, then we can take the theory and take it to our own organizations and tailor it. So what we're going to have a look at is contact theory. So this was raised by Gordon Allport in 1954. So the theory is getting a little bit old, but it's still really valuable in explaining how we try and combat us versus them. So he suggested that to minimize the negative effects of it, we need 4 optimal conditions. So the first one is intergroup cooperation. So essentially this means having our two groups work together. Research has shown that even with extremely conflicting groups, if they were able to work together, it actually decreased the levels of perceived discrimination. The next one we have is support from authority. So this is particularly helpful when it's coming from individuals that are influential, because they can support that there are only minimal differences between the groups, and these individuals in positions of authority can easily influence others to show that there are probably more things in common, there are more similarities between two groups than there are differences. The next thing, again, we have is common goals. So groups need to work together towards something. They need to be aligned so that they have something that they can communicate for and about. So when we do, we're more likely to see those similarities again. And I think that's a key part of us versus them, is emphasizing the similarities, not the differences. And then the last one we have is equal status. So both groups need to be perceived to be on the same level. Because if one group thinks they're above or below, there's going to be that resentment that starts forming when it shouldn't be. And again, highlighting the differences between the groups. So the point with contact theory is really to show and highlight that similarities need to be brought to the forefront of our attention rather than differences. So now theory is great, but we do need to take this into some practical takeaways. So at Cognizant Workday Practice, we have a few ways that we try and guide our teams into successful cohesion, and that is integrated into our change management strategies. So we're going to have a look into that first. So we're going to go into how do we start with a successful cohesion. So first one we have off the bat is transparency. So this could be in various parts of the project. So whether that be the overall project, whether it be setbacks or even positive impact, the best practice is to be clear and honest And this way of communicating is kept open, and it should foster that two-way stream. So if we think back to why groups actually favor their own, uncertainty. So by having this transparency, we're making sure that our streams of communication are open and everything is being brought to the forefront so that we're aware of what's happening, so that uncertainty is kept at bay. So then we feel a lot more comfortable working together as a group, as opposed to relying back on our own group and relying on that structure of the singular group. So the next thing we have is leniency. So we at Cognizant Workday practice, we would say that we're the Workday experts. So we love Workday, so we know all about it. And sometimes we might think that we know the exact solution, but actually when we think about it in client settings, it might not work for the client that we're working with, because the client knows their culture, their people, and how things work. So we need to be lenient and understand what work for the client. But likewise on the other side is that the client needs to understand that we are the Workday experts. We know what is going to work in terms of Workday. So sometimes there needs to be that collaboration between letting something slide and actually pushing those boundaries and pulling back on the boundaries to understand what the best way is to enhance both sides and make both sides work well together, so that we're accommodating each other's expertise in the project so that the implementation would be a success overall. The next thing we have is personability. So often when we're working, we forget that we're all individuals outside of work. We do have lives outside of work. And, how do we make friends? We talk to people about personal things. Despite being in a work environment, we should still be setting some time aside to, make those personal connections, talk about somebody's day, talk about the weather. In England, we love to talk about the weather. So, it could be weekend plans. It could be accents, families, anything, just to make those personal connections. And this way we start forming deeper, more meaningful connections rather than just surface level work relationships. And in that way, again, we're more likely to be open and honest because we feel more comfortable getting to know and working with each other. So when we think back to contact theory, they're trying establishing common goals. So that doesn't necessarily have to be work related. So I could say maybe I'm trying to get 10,000 steps a day. And somebody on my client team might be trying to get 10,000 steps a day. So it'd be nice to catch up and say, oh, how are you getting along? It could be as simple as that. But creating that personability is just going to enhance your team's cohesion together because we're thinking about the actual relationship rather than just at a work level. So the next one we have is language. So sometimes I'm probably even doing it now where I've been presenting and I've often forgotten what I've just said because I'm just rambling. And sometimes actually we need to make a conscious effort about what we're saying. So once the words start flowing, we need to sometimes take a step back and actually stop and understand that what we say does have an impact. So when we're working on it and building those relationships, we need to focus on language like we and together and all of us, rather than saying your team, my team, or even another thing would be instead of saying teams at all, using people's names, which show that we are all working together as a team rather than that there are two separate groups. And this would be particularly helpful coming from that person in positional. I can't get my words out today. A person in authority. So again, linking it back to contact theory, once we have somebody at the top being able to show that we are all part of one team, it really reinforces that we are all working together on the same team. And the last thing is acknowledgement, where I've said a few times already, a lot of this stuff that happens is subconscious. We're not actively going out of our way to discriminate against another group. We're not actively trying to leave somebody out or create that divide. So by bringing us versus them to the table and saying, we know that us versus them occurs, it's a principle, it happens in everyday life, let's try and combat it. And then that's what we like to do here at Cognizant as well. We like to talk about it before we even start our projects to say, this is something that happens. We don't want it to happen. So let's make sure that everybody knows what it is so that we can actively try and combat it. So now I've said all that, how do we then enforce all of that cohesion into our change management? So here at the Cognizant Workday practice, we have a fully dedicated advisory and OC&T team focused on the people side of the project. So as we all know, people are the heart of the organization. And at the end of the day, the organization doesn't change. People change the organization. So we like to have a whole separate entity for our change management, because it's seen many, many times that organizations try to integrate change management into project management. But that doesn't work, because change management is difficult. It's complex. Like I said, people are complex individuals. So because of this, we can't just squish change management on the side as a side piece. It's never going to be successful. We should always consider that change management is its own entity and it works alongside project management. So in the Cognizant Workday practice, we work in 3 key stages. So we have the prepare stage, manage, and reinforce. And this could occur at any stage during the project. So by doing so, having these 3 stages, we are limiting the chances of us versus them occurring, making sure that our projects are running smoothly throughout the project. We're not just focusing on the start or the end. We are focusing on us versus them throughout, because you may form an amazing relationship at the start, but things can get rocky in the middle and things can change. So that's why it needs to be a priority throughout the whole project. So I'm going to divulge a little bit more about what we do at the Cognizant Workday practice. But remember, this could be applied to your own organization as well. So during the prepare stage, the key idea here is all about getting to know your client and forming those initial relationships. So we want to know all about not only the company, but the employees themselves, the client team themselves. Like I was saying earlier with forming our cohesion, is getting to know the team. So we want to understand the company culture, the ways of working, so that this helps us align ourselves to your working routine so that we are forming that one group. But it's also important, like I said, to get to know people on a personal level. In this stage, we also want to find out who is key in your Workday deployment, individuals that might start generating that us versus them mentality, and how much they might impact the business. This way we can pay special attention to them, and we can start managing those expectations and start getting to win them over, start reducing that uncertainty at the beginning, at the get-go. Then moving on to manage. So the whole part of manage is managing those relationships. So we've formed them and we need to maintain them throughout the project. This is about trying to keep everybody excited about your Workday deployment. Because at the end of the day, not everyone is going to be fully on board about Workday at the beginning. And our job and the job of the team who are doing the deployment, all of us together, is to get people excited, to get people ready for Workday so that they can actually utilize it before go live. And when it goes live, before it goes live, we need to keep that momentum going. So we understand that people have slightly different needs, whether that be for training or for comms, how they want to hear about certain pieces of information. It's going to be different. So this is where we want to emphasize that we're all in this together. We're all here to help. And it's about making sure that people are not uncertain. They know what's going on. They are well informed about how and what is going to affect them before the changes are made. So then when the changes are made, they're fully informed and they know what's happening. And then lastly, we have our reinforce stage. So this reinforce stage is really to reiterate to clients that even though you might have gone live, we're not disappearing. We are here. We've created this long-lasting relationship for a reason. We have become integrated within the project so that we can continue after deployment. So that if there are any problems, we're always here to help. Part of this is listening to feedback, keeping those lines of communication open, keeping honest, so that we can essentially be there for you when you need it. So that does bring us to the end of our presentation today. So I'm just going to go through a few little key reminders from what we talked about. So groups are everywhere. Whether we consciously acknowledge it or not, groups are everywhere. And you may be a part of one, you may be a part of hundreds, it could be thousands technically. And that could be also translate into your work environment. So the us versus them principle, what actually is it? So it's where we view the in-group as something positive and the out-group as something negative, even though they might not be a negative group. So us versus them can occur in client relationships, whether it be internally or with external teams. And we need to make sure that we are consciously aware of trying to prevent it from happening. Because if it does, it can start leading to some super negative effects of subconscious discrimination. These negative effects could be stress and burnout, project stagnation, which ultimately will affect your return on investment. And so hopefully today you've learned something. You've learned that, thinking about taking contact theory and thinking about how you can apply it to your own organization, but also how Cognizant at the Workday practice, we can help with your deployment because we have that dedicated team that are focused on maintaining relationships, building relationships, so that us versus them does not occur, and the Workday project itself is smooth throughout the whole thing. So thank you guys for listening, and I'm just going to pass it back over to Susie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellie. I'm sure everybody will agree that those were some fascinating and thought-provoking insights into the realms of the us versus them phenomenon. Don't forget, a link to the recording will be shared with you so that you can revisit and also share the valuable information. If you have any other questions, if you're just digesting all the content that's been shared with you and you think of something later on, it's fine. Please feel free to reach out to us by emailing us at inquiries@collaborativesolutions.com. We really appreciate each and every one of you for joining us today, taking time out. Before you go, we kindly ask for a little bit of feedback by completing a real short survey, which you'll see pop up right at the end, because your input is important. It helps us to tailor future sessions to better meet your needs and interests. And thank you once again for participating. And we look forward to seeing you in future sessions. Have a wonderful rest of the day.